The alarm on my wrist device buzzed so loud that I almost dropped my tray of tools. I was already late. The transport dock on Haven Station was packed shoulder to shoulder, thousands of workers and travelers moving in every direction, and I had exactly 4 minutes to reach Gate 11 before my shift supervisor marked me absent again. My name is Daniel Hartley, and that morning I was thinking about nothing except my paycheck, my sore feet, and the cup of coffee I had not finished. I was not thinking about alien royalty. I did not even know an alien royal convoy was anywhere near the station that day. Nobody had told me. Nobody tells guys like me anything. I pushed through the crowd, weaving around cargo carts and floating luggage drones, my boots slapping against the metal floor. The station announcer kept repeating something about a restricted corridor near Gate 9, but I barely listened. Restricted corridors happened all the time on Haven Station. Rich diplomats, corporate executives, alien delegations, they all passed through here on their way to somewhere more important. I turned a corner too fast. There was a wall of people in front of me, dressed in silver and deep blue robes, standing so still they almost looked like statues. I did not have time to stop. My shoulder collided directly into someone walking in the opposite direction, and the impact spun both of us half a step sideways. For one heartbeat, everything went silent. I mean that literally. The noise of the station, the footsteps, the announcements, all of it seemed to disappear, like the whole world had been muted. I looked up, ready to apologize to whoever I had just knocked into, and my stomach dropped. She was not human. Her skin held a faint silver shimmer under the station lights, almost like moonlight resting on water. Her eyes were a deep violet color, wide with something I could not immediately name, shock maybe, or disbelief. She wore a long fitted coat the color of midnight, stitched with patterns that seemed to shift and glow faintly whenever she moved. Around her stood a dozen tall figures in silver armor, and every single one of them had frozen in place, their weapons half raised, their expressions unreadable behind reflective visors. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. I stood there, still holding my tray of tools, my mouth slightly open, waiting for someone to yell at me. On any normal day, bumping into a stranger meant a quick sorry and moving on. This did not feel like a normal day. "I am so sorry," I said quickly, taking a step back. I wasn't looking where I was going. "Are you okay?" The woman in front of me did not answer right away. She lifted one hand slowly and touched her own shoulder, the exact place where my arm had struck her, as if she needed to confirm that it had actually happened. Her violet eyes studied me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. One of the armored guards finally moved, stepping forward with a speed that blurred his outline for a split second. He placed himself between us, his hand resting on something at his hip that looked uncomfortably like a weapon. "Do not move," he said, his voice carrying a strange, layered tone, like two voices speaking at once. "Do you understand what you have done?" "I bumped into someone," I said, holding both hands up. "I said I was sorry. I really didn't mean anything by it." "You touched Her Highness," the guard said, each word sharp and clipped. "Unauthorized, unscanned, unshielded contact." I blinked. Her Highness. I looked past the guard at the woman again. She had lowered her hand from her shoulder, and now she was watching me with an expression that had shifted from shock into something closer to fascination. She raised one hand slightly, a small gesture, and the guard in front of me stepped back immediately, though his posture stayed tense and ready. "Wait," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "Highness? Like royalty? I didn't know. Nobody told me there was a princess walking through Gate 9 this morning." A few of the other guards exchanged glances, quick and sharp, the kind of look people give each other when something impossible has just happened in front of them. I did not understand it yet, but I would soon learn that what I had just done should not have been possible at all. "You could not have known," the woman finally said. Her voice was calm, almost musical, carrying that same layered quality as the guards, but softer, gentler. "That is precisely the problem." I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing. She stepped closer, ignoring the visible tension rippling through her guards. Up close, I could see fine lines of silver light tracing along her collarbone, like circuitry built into her skin, pulsing faintly with each breath she took. She was studying me the way a scientist studies something they have never seen before. "What is your name?" she asked. "Daniel," I said. "Daniel Hartley." "Daniel Hartley," she repeated, testing the sound of it. "You walked through a security perimeter designed to detect and stop any unauthorized approach within 3 meters of my person. You should have triggered 4 separate alarms before you were ever close enough to make contact. And yet here you stand, having touched me, with no alarms, no warnings, and no resistance from my own reflexes." "I wasn't trying to sneak past anything," I said honestly. "I was just late for work and not paying attention. I turned the corner and there you were. That's it. That's the whole story." One of the guards spoke quickly to another, in a language I did not understand, low and urgent. The woman lifted a hand again, and they fell silent immediately, though I could tell they were not happy about it. "Captain Vex," she said, addressing the guard who had first stepped in front of me, "escort Mr. Hartley to a secure room. Do not harm him. Do not question him without me present." My heart nearly stopped. Wait, secure room? Am I under arrest? I told you, it was an accident. "You are not under arrest," she said, and something in her tone made me believe her, even though every instinct in my body was screaming that this situation was completely out of my control. "But you have done something today that my people have not seen accomplished in living memory. I intend to understand how." Before I could ask another question, Captain Vex placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm but not painful, and guided me away from the crowd. I looked back once and saw the princess still standing there, watching me leave, her expression unreadable, the silver light along her collarbone pulsing slightly faster than before. The walk to the secure room felt like it lasted forever, though it was probably only a few minutes. Captain Vex did not speak to me. He kept his hand near his weapon the entire time, his visor angled toward me like he expected me to do something unexpected again at any moment. I wanted to tell him that bumping into people was not exactly a skill I had trained for, but something about his posture told me now was not the time for jokes. We passed through 2 sets of doors that hissed open and closed with heavy mechanical certainty, and finally entered a small room with metal walls, a single table, and 2 chairs. Captain Vex gestured for me to sit, then took a position by the door, arms crossed, watching me without blinking. I sat down and tried to steady my breathing. My tray of tools sat forgotten somewhere back near Gate 9. My shift supervisor was probably furious by now. None of that mattered anymore. I had somehow, without even trying, walked straight through security, designed to stop exactly that kind of thing, and touched an alien princess on the shoulder like it was nothing. I did not know it yet, but that single accidental moment was about to change everything, not just for me, but for how an entire alien empire viewed humanity as a whole. Somewhere beyond those metal walls, reports were already being filed, questions were already being asked, and people far more powerful than me were about to take a very close interest in an ordinary man who had simply been running late for work. I leaned back in the chair, trying to look calm even though my hands were shaking slightly. "So," I said quietly, mostly to myself, "that happened." Captain Vex did not respond. He just kept watching me, like he was waiting to see what impossible thing I might do next. The room stayed silent for what felt like an hour, though a clock on the wall told me it had only been 20 minutes. Captain Vex never moved from his spot by the door. I sat there running the last few minutes over and over in my mind, trying to figure out how a simple accident had turned into whatever this was. The door finally hissed open, and the princess walked in alone. Captain Vex straightened immediately, but she waved him off with a small gesture. "Wait outside," she said. "I wish to speak with him privately." "Highness, protocol requires." "I am aware of protocol, Captain," she said, her tone firm but not unkind. "I am also aware that this man has already broken every rule protocol assumed could not be broken. I do not believe he intends to harm me." Captain Vex hesitated, then nodded once and stepped out, the door sliding shut behind him. For the first time, I was alone in a room with an actual alien princess, and I had absolutely no idea what to say. She sat down across from me, folding her hands neatly on the table. Up close, without the crowd of guards around her, she looked less like a symbol of power and more like a person who was genuinely curious. "My name is Leora," she said. "I am the crown heir of the Velkaran Dominion. You may have heard of us." "Honestly, no," I admitted. "I work maintenance on this station. I fix broken conveyor systems and leaking pipes. I don't exactly follow galactic politics." To my surprise, she almost smiled. "That may explain a great deal." "Explain what, exactly? Why is everyone acting like I just committed some enormous crime?" "I bumped into you. People bump into each other every single day." "Not into me," Leora said. "Every member of the Velkaran royal line is protected by a personal shielding system from birth. It reads intention, movement, and threat patterns from every living being within a certain range. It should have activated the moment you turned that corner. It should have pushed you back gently, redirected your path, and alerted my guards long before you were close enough to make contact. But it didn't," I said slowly, starting to understand. "It did not," she confirmed, "which means either the system failed, which has never happened in 300 years of use, or your movements were unpredictable enough that the system could not calculate a response in time." I sat back in my chair, trying to process that. "So you're saying I'm too clumsy for your alien technology to track?" "I am saying your species may move in ways our systems were never designed to anticipate," she said. "We have interacted with many species across many worlds. Most follow patterns. Predictable acceleration, predictable reaction times, predictable decision paths. Our shields are built around those patterns. You did not follow any pattern our engineers have ever recorded." "I was just late for work," I said. "I wasn't trying to break any patterns. I was trying not to lose my job." "That is precisely what makes this so remarkable," Leora said, leaning forward slightly. "You were not attempting anything extraordinary. You were simply being yourself, distracted and hurried, and that alone was enough to bypass a defense system built to stop trained assassins." The word assassins made my stomach twist. "Wait, people actually try to hurt you, like that's a real thing that happens?" "More often than I would like," she said simply, no fear in her voice, just tired acceptance. "My family holds significant political power. Not everyone is pleased by that." I did not know what to say to that, so I stayed quiet for a moment, letting the weight of her words settle. This was not just an accident anymore. This was someone whose life involved real danger, real threats, and now, somehow, me. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Am I going to get in trouble? Is your government going to be angry at me?" "There will be questions," she admitted. "My advisors will want to understand exactly what happened, and they will likely wish to study the incident closely. Some may see it as a security failure that must be corrected immediately. Others may see it as something else entirely." "Something else like what?" Leora studied me for a long moment before answering. "An opportunity." Before I could ask what she meant, the door opened again, and a different figure stepped inside, this one dressed in dark green robes with sharp angular features and cold eyes that immediately fixed on me like I was a problem to be solved. Leora's posture changed instantly, becoming more formal, more guarded. "Highness," the newcomer said, bowing slightly but keeping his eyes on me the whole time. "I am General Korath, head of your personal security division. I must insist on being included in this conversation." "General," Leora said evenly, "I was simply gathering information. Information that should have been gathered by trained interrogators, not by your Highness personally," Korath said. His voice carried none of the warmth Leora's had. "This human represents a significant and unexplained breach in your protection. I do not take that lightly." "I already told you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It was an accident. I didn't plan any of this." Korath turned his sharp gaze on me fully for the first time. Accidents do not typically bypass military-grade defense systems, human. Either you possess technology or abilities unknown to us, which makes you a threat, or your entire species possesses some unpredictable quality our systems cannot account for, which makes your entire species a threat. Neither possibility comforts me. I fix pipes for a living, I said. I don't have secret alien technology hidden in my jacket. Look, search me if you have to. I've got nothing but tools and half a sandwich. Something flickered across Leora's face, almost amusement, quickly hidden again as Korath turned back to her. Highness, I recommend we take Mr. Hartley into extended custody while a full investigation is conducted. That will not be necessary, Leora said, her voice suddenly firm in a way that surprised me. Mr. Hartley has cooperated fully. He poses no threat that I can see. I will not have an innocent worker detained simply because our own systems failed to perform as expected. With respect, Highness, this is a security matter, not a diplomatic one. It is both, Leora said, standing up from her chair. And as Crown Heir, the final decision rests with me, not with the security division. Mr. Hartley will be released, though I would like the opportunity to continue speaking with him, under appropriate supervision, of course. Korath's jaw tightened, but he said nothing further, clearly unhappy but unwilling to argue directly against her authority. He gave me one last hard look before turning and leaving the room, his robes snapping sharply behind him. Once the door closed, Leora let out a small breath, something almost like relief. I apologize for the general. He takes his duties very seriously, sometimes to an uncomfortable degree. He seemed like he wanted to lock me in a very small room forever, I said. He very well might have, given the chance, she admitted. But I meant what I said. You are free to go, Daniel. I do not believe you intended any harm. Relief washed over me, but it was mixed with something unexpected, a strange reluctance to simply walk away from this moment. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was something else I did not fully understand yet. Can I ask you something? I said as she moved toward the door. She paused, turning back toward me. Of course. Why do you actually care what happens to me? I'm just a random guy who ran into you by accident. Most people in your position probably wouldn't have even remembered my name by tomorrow. Leora considered the question seriously, her violet eyes thoughtful. Because you did something today that should not have been possible, and you did it without effort, without intention, and without fear once the moment had passed. That tells me either our understanding of your species is deeply incomplete, or there is something about you personally worth understanding, perhaps both. That's a lot of pressure to put on a guy who was just trying to get to work on time. A small, genuine smile crossed her face this time. Perhaps, but I find myself curious nonetheless. Would you object if I requested to speak with you again, under less stressful circumstances? I should have said no. Every instinct told me that getting tangled up with alien royalty, security systems, and generals who looked at me like a threat to be neutralized was probably the worst idea I had ever considered. But something about the way she asked, genuine and a little hopeful, made the decision easy. I wouldn't object, I said. Just maybe next time, we could meet somewhere without 12 armed guards watching my every move. I will see what can be arranged, Leora said, and for a moment, standing there in that small metal room, she looked less like a princess of a powerful alien empire and more like someone who simply wanted a conversation with another person, free from politics and protocol. She left the room a moment later, and Captain Vex escorted me back through the station, though his grip on my shoulder was noticeably gentler than before. As I walked back toward Gate 9 to collect my forgotten tools, I could not shake the feeling that something enormous had just been set into motion, something far bigger than a simple accidental bump in a crowded hallway. I had no idea just how right that feeling would turn out to be. 3 days passed before I heard anything else about the incident, and during those 3 days, I convinced myself that nothing more would come of it. I went back to my normal routine, fixing broken conveyor systems, patching leaking pipes, eating lunch alone in the maintenance break room while my coworkers talked about sports scores and station gossip. Nobody at work knew what had happened. I had not told anyone. Who would even believe me if I did? On the fourth day, a message appeared on my wrist device that made my chest tighten the moment I read it. It was formal, official, written in careful language, requesting my presence at a private meeting location within the diplomatic quarter of Haven Station. The sender was listed simply as Office of the Crown Heir. I stared at the message for a long time before showing it to my friend Oliver Marsh, who worked in the cargo bay 2 levels below mine. Oliver read it twice, then looked at me like I had grown a second head. "You're telling me an actual alien princess wants to meet with you again," he said slowly. "The same princess whose security detail almost had you locked up." "That's exactly what I'm telling you," I said. "And you're going to go?" "I mean, yeah, what am I supposed to do? Ignore a summons from royalty? I don't think that ends well for me." Oliver shook his head, half amused and half concerned. "Just be careful, Daniel. Diplomatic quarters aren't exactly known for being simple places. There's a lot of politics up there most of us never see." He was right, though I did not fully understand how right until I actually arrived. The diplomatic quarter looked nothing like the rest of Haven Station. Instead of scuffed metal floors and exposed piping, the corridors here were polished smooth, lined with soft glowing light strips and quiet fountains that hummed gently. Guards stood at nearly every intersection, from a dozen different species, each wearing uniforms representing their own governments. A young Velcarin attendant met me at the entrance and guided me through a series of corridors until we reached a private lounge overlooking one of the station's massive observation windows. Stars stretched endlessly beyond the glass, distant and silent. Leora stood near the window, dressed more casually than before, in simple flowing robes, without the elaborate patterns I had seen on our first meeting. Captain Vex stood nearby, though he kept a respectful distance this time. "Daniel," Leora said, turning as I entered, a genuine warmth in her voice. "Thank you for coming." "Did I really have a choice?" I asked, only half joking. "You did, actually," she said. "You could have declined the invitation. I would have understood, given how our first meeting went." "Honestly, I was curious," I admitted. "Not every day a guy like me gets invited into the diplomatic quarter." She gestured toward a pair of chairs near the window, and we sat, the quiet hum of the station fading into the background as the stars stretched endlessly beyond the glass. For a while, we simply talked, and it felt strangely normal, like two people getting to know each other, rather than a human worker sitting across from an alien princess. She asked about my life, my work, my family, and I found myself answering honestly, telling her about growing up on a smaller colony before moving to Haven Station for better job opportunities, about my parents, who still lived planetside, about the small, unremarkable details of an ordinary human life. She listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking follow-up questions that showed she was actually paying attention, not just being polite. In return, she told me about her own life, though it painted a very different picture from mine. She had been trained since childhood in diplomacy, combat, and governance, groomed her entire life to one day lead the Velcarin Dominion. She spoke of formal ceremonies, political alliances, arranged meetings with foreign dignitaries, and constant security concerns that followed her everywhere she went. "It sounds exhausting," I said honestly. "It often is," she admitted, "which is perhaps why our meeting, accidental as it was, has stayed with me so persistently. You were not trying to impress me. You were not calculating your words for political advantage. You were simply yourself, distracted and apologetic, completely unconcerned with who I was. To be fair, I didn't know who you were," I pointed out. "Even now that you know, you do not seem particularly concerned with impressing me," she said, a teasing note in her voice. "Should I be?" "Most people are," she said. "It becomes tiresome after a while, always wondering what someone truly wants from you, whether their kindness is genuine or simply strategic." I understood that better than she probably realized. Even among humans, plenty of people only wanted something from you, using friendliness as a tool rather than genuine connection. For what it's worth, I said, I don't want anything from you. I just think this whole situation is strange and kind of fascinating, honestly. Our conversation continued for nearly 2 hours before Captain Vex quietly reminded Leora of an upcoming diplomatic obligation. As I stood to leave, she asked if I would be willing to meet again, and I agreed without much hesitation. Over the following weeks, these meetings became a regular occurrence, always arranged carefully around her demanding schedule, always supervised at some distance by Captain Vex or another trusted guard, but increasingly relaxed and genuine. I learned more about Velcurin culture, their history, their technology, and their complicated political relationships with neighboring species. She learned more about humanity in return, our chaotic history, our stubborn resilience, and the strange, unpredictable nature that seemed to define us as a species. It was during one of these meetings that she brought up the shield incident again, this time with more detail than before. My engineers have spent weeks analyzing recordings of our encounter, she said one afternoon, sitting across from me in the same quiet lounge. They cannot fully explain how you avoided detection. Your movement patterns should have triggered an automatic response well before contact occurred. Maybe your engineers just need better technology, I said, only half joking. Perhaps, she said thoughtfully. Or perhaps human unpredictability is simply a variable our systems were never designed to account for. Every other species we have encountered follows recognizable behavioral patterns, shaped by evolution, culture, and instinct. Humans, from what I have observed and what my advisors have researched, seem to defy consistent categorization. I don't know if that's a compliment or an insult, I said. Neither do I, entirely, she admitted with a small smile, but it is undeniably interesting. Not everyone shared her fascination, however. General Korath made his disapproval known at every opportunity, appearing at the edges of our meetings with thinly veiled hostility, questioning my presence, requesting additional security screenings, and repeatedly urging Leora to distance herself from what he called an unnecessary and potentially dangerous association. During one meeting, he arrived unannounced, interrupting our conversation with barely concealed irritation. Highness, this continued association with the human is becoming a matter of concern among the council, he said, ignoring me entirely as though I were not sitting right there. Several members have begun asking questions about your judgment in this matter. My judgment remains sound, General, Leora said evenly. Daniel has proven himself trustworthy on multiple occasions. Trustworthy is not the same as safe, Korath said. His very presence represents an anomaly we do not fully understand. Anomalies are dangerous, Highness, regardless of intention. I appreciate your concern for my safety, Leora said, her tone cooling slightly, but I am capable of assessing threats to my own person. Daniel has never given me reason to fear him. Korath's eyes flicked toward me briefly, cold and calculating. Not yet, perhaps. He left without another word, but his warning lingered in the air long after he had gone. I could tell it bothered Leora more than she wanted to admit, though she tried to brush it off as simple overprotectiveness on the general's part. He means well, she said quietly, even if his methods sometimes frustrate me. Does he have a point, though? I asked carefully. I mean, I don't want to be the reason you get into trouble with your own government. You are not the source of trouble, she said firmly. If anything, your presence has forced my advisors to confront uncomfortable truths about the limits of our own understanding. That discomfort is not your fault, Daniel. It is simply the natural result of encountering something new. Despite her reassurances, I noticed subtle changes over the following weeks. Security around our meetings increased. Certain advisors began requesting detailed reports on my background, my daily routine, even my extended family. It felt less like simple caution and more like something building toward a larger confrontation, though I could not yet see the full shape of what was coming. Still, despite the growing tension, my friendship with Leora continued to deepen. We found small moments of genuine connection amid the political weight surrounding us. shared laughter over cultural misunderstandings, quiet conversations about hopes and fears that had nothing to do with politics or protocol. She began teaching me small phrases in her native language, and I taught her simple human idioms that left her thoroughly confused and delighted in equal measure. I did not fully understand yet how deep the currents beneath our friendship truly ran, currents involving rival factions, political rivals, and ambitions far larger than either of us. I only knew that what had started as an accidental bump in a crowded hallway had grown into something I genuinely valued, something worth protecting, even if I did not yet understand exactly what threats were gathering just beyond the edges of our quiet conversations by the observation window. That understanding would arrive far sooner than I expected, and far more violently than I could have imagined. The trouble began on an otherwise ordinary afternoon, nearly 2 months after that first accidental collision in the crowded hallway. Leora had arranged for us to meet in a quieter section of the diplomatic quarter, a small garden terrace tucked away from the main corridors, filled with plants gathered from a dozen different worlds. It was meant to be a peaceful place, away from prying eyes and political tension. I arrived a few minutes early, as I usually did, and found Captain Vex already stationed near the entrance, his posture more rigid than usual. "Is everything all right?" I asked. "Security has been increased station-wide," he said, his visor turned toward the far end of the corridor, rather than toward me. "There have been unconfirmed reports of unauthorized vessels approaching restricted docking zones. Nothing has been confirmed yet, but caution is warranted." I did not think much of it at the time. Station security increased for all sorts of reasons, and false alarms were common enough that most people barely noticed them anymore. I settled onto a bench near the garden's small fountain and waited for Leora to arrive. She appeared a short while later, though something in her expression told me the day was not going as smoothly as planned. She sat beside me, quieter than usual, her eyes occasionally drifting toward the corridor entrance. "You seem distracted," I said gently. "My advisors have been arguing for the better part of the morning," she admitted. "There has been unusual activity from a rival faction within the Dominion, a group that has long opposed my father's policies of open trade and cautious alliance building with outside species, including humanity. General Korath believes they may attempt something drastic to disrupt upcoming negotiations." "Drastic like what?" "I do not know exactly," she said. "Sabotage, perhaps. Political scandal, or something more direct." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Should you even be out here right now, if things are that tense? "Perhaps not," she admitted, "but I refuse to allow fear to dictate every moment of my life. I have faced threats before, Daniel. I do not intend to hide from every shadow that crosses my path." I wanted to argue, but before I could say anything further, the lights along the garden terrace flickered once, then dimmed noticeably. Captain Vex's posture snapped instantly to full alert, his hand moving to the weapon at his hip. "Highness, we need to move," he said sharply. "Now." "What's happening?" I asked, standing quickly as Leora rose beside me. "Power fluctuation in this sector," Vex said, already guiding us toward a side exit rather than the main corridor. "It could be nothing. It could also be deliberate." We had barely taken a few steps when the terrace door at the far end burst open, and 3 figures dressed in dark, unmarked armor moved swiftly into the garden, weapons raised. Captain Vex immediately positioned himself between them and Leora, shouting something urgent into a communicator on his wrist. "Get her out of here," he ordered me, his voice tight but controlled. "Through the side exit, now." "What about you?" "I will hold them as long as I can. Go." I grabbed Leora's hand without thinking, pulling her toward the side exit as Captain Vex moved to intercept the approaching figures. Behind us, I heard sharp commands exchanged in a language I did not understand, followed by the low hum of energy weapons being readied. We burst through the side exit into a narrow maintenance corridor, the kind of unglamorous back passage I actually knew quite well from my job. Pipes lined the walls, access panels dotted the ceiling, and dim emergency lighting flickered overhead. "This way," I said, pulling her toward a side passage I recognized from years of repair work. I know these corridors better than almost anyone on this station. Leora did not question me, trusting my judgment despite the chaos unfolding around us. We moved quickly through the narrow passage, the sound of distant shouting and hurried footsteps echoing behind us. "Who were those people?" I asked as we ran. "I do not know for certain," she said, breathing hard but keeping pace with me easily, clearly more capable physically than her elegant appearance suggested. But their armor matched no registered security force I recognize. This was not a sanctioned operation. We reached a junction where the corridor split in two directions, and I paused, trying to remember which path led toward the more populated sections of the station, where security response would be faster. "Left," I said finally. "It connects to the main cargo bay. More people, more station security nearby." We turned left, but had barely gone 20 steps before two more armored figures emerged from a side passage ahead of us, cutting off our path forward. I pulled Leora back instinctively, pushing her behind me without really thinking about what I was doing. "Stand down," one of the figures said, their voice distorted through a helmet speaker. "The princess comes with us. The human is not our concern." "That's not happening," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded, despite the fear pounding through my chest. "This does not need to become difficult," the figure said, taking a step closer. "Step aside." I glanced around quickly, my mind racing through the layout of the corridor, remembering details from years of repair work in exactly this section of the station. There was an access panel just above the intersection, connected to a coolant regulation system that, if triggered incorrectly, released a harmless but extremely disorienting burst of pressurized vapor, used normally for emergency venting during maintenance work. "Cover your eyes," I whispered to Leora, then reached up and slammed my palm against the emergency release lever beside the access panel. A thick burst of pressurized vapor exploded outward with a loud hiss, filling the corridor instantly with dense white fog and disorienting sound. The armored figures stumbled backward, momentarily blinded and confused, shouting commands to each other that no longer made coordinated sense. "Now move," I said, grabbing Leora's hand again and pulling her past the disoriented figures through the thick fog, using my knowledge of the corridor's layout to navigate blind while our pursuers struggled to regain their bearings. We burst out of the fog into a wider intersection just as a group of station security officers rounded the corner, weapons raised, responding finally to the earlier alarm Captain Vex had triggered. Leora quickly identified herself, and within moments, the security team moved past us into the fog-filled corridor to secure the area and pursue the retreating figures. Breathing hard, adrenaline still surging through my system, I finally allowed myself to slow down, leaning against the wall as Leora turned to face me, her expression a mixture of relief and something else I could not quite identify. "You saved us," she said quietly. "I just remembered where the maintenance vents were," I said, still catching my breath. "Anyone would have done the same thing." "No," she said firmly. "Not anyone. A trained soldier would have looked for a weapon. A diplomat would have looked for words. You looked for a solution nobody trained to fight would have considered, using knowledge unique to your own ordinary life. That is not nothing, Daniel. That is precisely the kind of unpredictability my advisors have struggled to understand since the day we met." Before I could respond, Captain Vex arrived, slightly worse for wear but clearly relieved to find us both safe. He gave a brief report to the security officers before turning to Leora with obvious concern. "Highness, are you injured?" "I am unharmed," she said. "Thanks entirely to Daniel's quick thinking." Vex looked at me with something approaching genuine respect for the first time since we had met. That corridor trick. I have never seen anyone use a maintenance vent that way in a security situation. "I fix these systems for a living," I said with a tired shrug. Figured it might come in handy eventually. Over the following hours, station security and Velcurin investigators worked together to identify the group responsible for the attack. It quickly became clear that General Korath's earlier warnings had been accurate. a rival faction within the Dominion, opposed to Leora's father's policies of alliance building with outside species, had attempted to abduct her, likely intending to use her as political leverage or simply remove her from the line of succession entirely, to install a more isolationist leader in her place. General Korath arrived shortly after the investigation began, and for once, his usual hostility toward me had shifted into something more complicated. "You disobeyed direct security protocol by remaining with the princess, instead of surrendering her location immediately to trained personnel," he said stiffly, though there was less bite in his voice than usual. "If I had done that, we might not have gotten away in time," I pointed out. Korath studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Your improvisation may have saved her life today. I do not say this lightly, human. I have spent months arguing that your unpredictability represented an unacceptable risk. Today, that same unpredictability may have been the deciding factor between success and disaster for those who sought to harm her." "Does that mean you're going to stop trying to have me locked up every time we meet?" I asked, only half joking. A faint, reluctant smile crossed his sharp features. "I make no promises, but perhaps my assessment of your species requires further reconsideration." Leora stepped closer, placing a hand gently on my arm. "Regardless of the General's evolving opinions, I owe you my safety today, Daniel. That is not a debt I take lightly." "You don't owe me anything," I said. "I just didn't want anything bad to happen to you." She looked at me then with an expression that carried more weight than words could easily explain, something warm and grateful and quietly hopeful all at once. Whatever this strange, unlikely connection between us had become, it was clear now that it extended far beyond simple curiosity or accidental circumstance. As station security continued their investigation into the failed abduction attempt, word of the incident began spreading quickly, not just through Haven Station, but through diplomatic channels connecting to the wider Velkaran Dominion and beyond. An ordinary human maintenance worker had single-handedly outmaneuvered trained operatives using nothing but knowledge of station infrastructure and quick thinking under pressure. It was a small story in the grand scheme of galactic politics, but small stories have a way of growing into something much larger when the right people take notice. And plenty of powerful people, both allies and rivals of the Velkaran Dominion, were about to take very serious notice of exactly what humanity might be capable of. In the weeks following the failed abduction attempt, Haven Station buzzed with a different kind of energy than I had ever experienced before. The story of what happened in that maintenance corridor spread quickly, first through official security reports, then through diplomatic circles, and eventually into general conversation among station residents who had no direct connection to any of it. Somehow, my name kept appearing at the center of the story, which was the last thing I ever wanted or expected. Oliver found me one afternoon in the cargo bay, holding up his wrist device with an expression somewhere between amazement and disbelief. "Daniel, there's an actual article about you," he said. "An article. On an actual news feed. It says you outsmarted trained operatives using a coolant vent. They're calling you resourceful. Some feeds are calling you a hero." I panicked and pulled a lever, I said, embarrassed. "That's not exactly heroic." "Doesn't matter what you call it," Oliver said, grinning. "The rest of the galaxy seems pretty impressed." He was not exaggerating. Over the following days, I received messages from people I had never met, some curious, some congratulatory, a few even requesting formal interviews about the incident. I turned down most of them, uncomfortable with the sudden attention, though I could not entirely avoid the changing atmosphere around me. Leora's involvement in the story only amplified its reach. As crown heir to a major galactic power, any incident involving her safety naturally drew significant attention, and the fact that an ordinary human worker had played a central role in preventing her abduction made for a compelling narrative that spread quickly across multiple news networks, human and alien alike. More significantly, the incident sparked serious conversations within diplomatic circles about humanity's role in wider galactic affairs. For years, many species had viewed humans as a relatively young, unpredictable, and somewhat chaotic addition to the galactic community, useful for trade perhaps, but not particularly significant in matters of security or strategic importance. The events on Haven Station challenged that perception directly. I learned much of this from Leora herself during our meetings, which continued, though now under considerably tighter security following the attempted abduction. General Korath, surprisingly, had become one of the more consistent presences during these meetings, his earlier hostility replaced by a cautious, professional respect that occasionally bordered on genuine warmth, though he would never have admitted that outright. "The Council has requested a full briefing on the incident," Leora told me one afternoon, as we sat together in a newly secured section of the diplomatic quarter, considerably less scenic than the garden terrace, but far safer. "Several delegates have expressed interest in re-evaluating existing agreements regarding human security cooperation. That sounds like a lot of political weight resting on one lucky accident with a coolant vent," I said. "Perhaps," she said, "but sometimes small moments reveal larger truths. My father has long believed that humanity possesses qualities worth understanding more deeply: adaptability, resilience, creative problem-solving under pressure. What happened in that corridor provided undeniable evidence supporting his position, evidence that even skeptical council members find difficult to dismiss." "So what happens now?" I asked. "More treaties? More formal alliances?" "Likely," she said, "though the path forward remains complicated. Not everyone within the Dominion welcomes closer ties with outside species, as you experienced firsthand. The faction responsible for the abduction attempt still has sympathizers within our government, individuals who view any strengthening of human relations as a threat to traditional Velcaran values and isolationist policies. Are you worried about more attacks?" "I am cautious," she said, choosing her words carefully, "but I refuse to allow fear to dictate policy or personal choices. That path leads only to stagnation." Our conversations continued in this manner over the following weeks, blending personal connection with the larger political currents swirling around us. I found myself drawn deeper into a world I had never expected to be part of, attending occasional formal functions at Leora's request, meeting diplomats and officials from species I had only ever seen in passing on Haven Station's busy corridors. It was during one such function, a formal gathering celebrating the strengthening ties between several allied systems, that General Korath approached me privately, away from the main crowd of dignitaries and diplomats. "A word, Mr. Hartley," he said, his tone carrying none of its earlier hostility. "Sure," I said, slightly wary out of habit. "I owe you an apology," he said, surprising me completely. "My initial assessment of you as a threat was based on incomplete understanding. I have spent considerable time reviewing the incident in that corridor, along with our original encounter months ago. I believe now that what I perceived as danger was, in truth, simply an inability on our part to properly categorize something genuinely new." "I appreciate that," I said honestly. "For what it's worth, I never wanted to be seen as a threat. I just wanted to help, and maybe get to know Leora a little better along the way." Korath studied me for a long moment, something thoughtful crossing his sharp features. "The Council has taken note of your actions, Mr. Hartley. There has been discussion, informal at this stage, regarding potential advisory roles for humans within certain security divisions, given the unique perspective your species offers." "Wait, are you offering me a job?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "I am suggesting the possibility exists," he said carefully. "Nothing has been formally decided, but your instincts in that corridor demonstrated value that trained personnel, myself included, had not adequately considered. Humanity's unpredictability, once viewed purely as a liability, may in fact represent a significant strategic asset when properly understood and integrated." I did not know what to say to that, so I simply nodded, letting the weight of the moment settle over me. A job offer from the very security division that had once considered me a dangerous unknown variable felt like an enormous shift, symbolic of something much larger happening across the galaxy regarding how humanity was perceived. Later that evening, After the formal function had ended and most guests had departed, Leora found me standing near one of the station's massive observation windows, watching the distant stars stretch endlessly beyond the glass, much like our earlier conversations in the quiet garden terrace. "You seem thoughtful," she said, joining me by the window. "General Korath offered me a possible advisory position," I said. "Still can't quite believe that happened." "He mentioned the possibility to me as well," Leora admitted. "I confess, I encouraged the idea, though the final decision rests entirely with you." "Why would you want me working alongside your security division?" I asked. "Seems like a strange fit for a maintenance worker." "Because you see solutions others overlook," she said simply. "Because your presence, both in that corridor and in every conversation we have shared since, has consistently challenged assumptions my people have held for generations. I believe that value extends far beyond a single fortunate incident." I considered her words carefully, looking out at the stars stretching endlessly before us. "Can I ask you something else?" "Of course. All of this, the political shifts, the growing alliance between our species, the job offers, does any of it change things between us? I mean, personally, not politically." Leora turned to face me fully, her violet eyes thoughtful in the soft light reflecting off the observation window. "I have asked myself that same question many times over these past months, Daniel. What began as curiosity following an accidental encounter has grown into something I did not anticipate, something that exists entirely separate from politics, alliances, or strategic considerations." "That's a very diplomatic way of not answering my question," I said, smiling slightly. She smiled back, softer this time, more genuine than any expression I had seen from her during formal functions or council briefings. "Then allow me to answer more directly. Whatever changes occur between our peoples on a larger scale, my personal regard for you remains unaffected by politics. You were the first person in a very long time to treat me simply as myself, rather than as a title or a political asset. That is not something I intend to lose, regardless of what larger events unfold around us." Standing there together, watching the stars stretch endlessly beyond the glass, I realized just how far things had come since that chaotic, embarrassing moment when I had accidentally collided with a stranger in a crowded hallway, utterly unaware of who she truly was. What had started as a simple accident had grown into something far larger, reshaping not only my own ordinary life, but potentially the relationship between humanity and one of the galaxy's most influential powers. In the months that followed, formal negotiations between humanity and the Velcarin Dominion progressed steadily, built upon the foundation of trust established through those early, unpredictable moments. I accepted General Korath's offer, becoming one of the first human advisors integrated into Velcarin security planning, my unconventional background and instincts proving valuable in ways neither I nor anyone else could have fully predicted beforehand. Leora and I continued to grow closer, our connection deepening naturally over shared experiences, quiet conversations, and mutual respect built through genuine understanding rather than political calculation. General Korath, once my fiercest skeptic, became something close to a trusted colleague, occasionally even sharing dry humor about our first tense encounters months earlier. Word of humanity's unpredictable resilience spread throughout the wider galactic community, shifting perceptions gradually but meaningfully. We were no longer simply viewed as a young, chaotic species existing on the fringes of galactic significance. We had become something worth serious consideration, worth genuine partnership, all beginning from one small, unremarkable moment of clumsy distraction in a crowded station hallway. Sometimes, late in the evening, when official duties finally quieted and the station settled into its rhythmic nighttime hum, Leora and I would return to that same observation window where we had shared so many important conversations, watching the stars stretch endlessly beyond the glass, grateful for the strange, unpredictable path that had brought us together. I never planned any of it. I never trained for diplomacy, never studied galactic politics, never imagined that a distracted rush to work would eventually reshape relations between two entire civilizations. But sometimes, the most significant changes in life begin with the smallest, most ordinary accidents: a distracted turn around a corner, an apologetic collision in a crowded hallway, and a princess who chose curiosity over anger in a moment that could easily have gone very differently. That single accidental shoulder bump had changed everything, not just for me, but for the future relationship between two entire species, proving that sometimes the most extraordinary outcomes begin with nothing more than an ordinary, unremarkable mistake.